Thank you, Dr. Peresa, for the introduction, and I'm very pleased that Professor Asmar Beg is here to chair the meeting. And of course, most importantly, I'm very excited to give this talk and speak to you, the young generation, which is the future of not simply India, but also the future of the world or the future of humanity. Some of you might know that I had done my doctoral fieldwork almost 20 years ago, just after the war on terror began. And much of my fieldwork was here. I also went to other places. So in that sense, I don't have any degree from Aligarh Muslim University, but I do have association with Aligarh Muslim University as well as the city and the town. Okay, now, while I was traveling from Delhi to Aligarh, I had many invitations to do the talk, but I didn't entertain those invitations. But I did accept this one because I was very keen on coming to Aligarh, so I'm very pleased to see you all. And while I was traveling, I did some slight change in the title of the talk. Is this a usual thing or something else is happening, right? No, I mean electricity, right? It is a usual thing? So should I continue or should I wait? Okay. So let me begin with this basic thing, that why I came to this idea of knowledge and power. Just last week, I went to my ancestral place where nobody lives. The house is deserted. And I did find some old Vaishali notebooks, copies, okay, in those days. It is all with 1 or 2 inch of dust. These are notes that I had taken when I was a student at Madrasa Islamia Arabi Dumri. And on the cover of that, it was written, Rabbe Zidni Ilman. So it is from that initial moment that I'm concerned about what is ilm and what is knowledge. Okay? Now, of course, from that time, as a kid, going to madrasa, as you travel through different educational trajectories, government schooling, then you come to Jamia, then Jawaharlal Nehru University, and then finally to the Western Academy, then the question still remains, what is knowledge? What I have been taught, and what I have been taught in madrasa, what my parents, what my community taught, what is knowledge? And what is being taught in the government institution or in the Western Academy, I had a sense of discomfort that the conception of ilm or knowledge that I grew up with, and the conception and the idea of knowledge that I was given later on, whether it is through educational institution run by the government or the Western universities, there was sort of radical disjunction. So that is the initial catalyst, if you want to use that word, for my interest in the idea of knowledge. Later on, as during masters and MPhil and subsequently, then everybody encounters Foucault, knowledge, power, and so on. Now, with this initial sort of glimpse into my biographical trajectory, because I think it is important to know where one begins, you know. Now, what I want to do here is this, that not simply contemporary India okay? But also the knowledge of India in terms of its history, and not simply India in terms of national register, but also how the knowledge about India is bound up with the power configuration in the Western Academy. So we need to understand that how we know about India and how that knowledge has come about, because without equipping ourselves with that knowledge, we actually cannot understand what is happening now as well as what has happened in the past. Okay? And in order to do that, I think it is very important that we must be having enough and sufficient critical thought about the language that we speak and about the vocabulary that is part of our everyday conversation. You see, in the philosophy of language, there is one stream of thought which says that language is simply a container of thought. Language simply conveys the thought. Okay? There is another stream of linguistic philosophy which says that language is not simply conveyor of thought. Language also constitutes and shapes thoughts. Okay? And words, terms, okay, whether it is love jihad, this is not simply a category. This is not simply two words. These are, as you know, some of you who have read What is Literature by Jean-Paul Sartre, and he says that actually word is like a bullet in a pistol. Okay? In fact, how and where you put the comma can kill a person as well as save the person. So you know the famous example, this is the judgment passed by a judge, and it says, pardon not to be killed. So if you put comma after pardon, okay, not to be killed, but if you put the comma after not, then the same phrase can have radically different repercussion, including the killing or the death of the person. So even comma matters, right? So I think to understand ourselves, and understand ourselves not on terms of others, but on our own terms. Please note that in the tradition that we are part of, knowledge is ultimately geared towards freedom. The Arabic word is hurriyat or hurriya. So all of you know Tahrir Square. So Hurriyat, Tahrir, and we also had Majlis-e-Ahrar as an organization here. All these words are connected. When you write something in Urdu, it is called Aapki Tahrir hai ye, Muharrir. All these words are connected. So the ultimate goal of intellectual scholarship or our thinking or our education is to secure freedom. Okay? Not simply for ourselves, but also freedom of others. Because let us remember that you cannot be free, you cannot be in possession of hurriyat unless you cannot be in the possession of your own hurriyat as long as there are people elsewhere, whether it is in your own neighborhood or people outside, they are not also free. So if there is unfreedom in one part of the world, or if there is unfreedom in one section of the society, another section of the society cannot be free. Okay? So with this qualification, what I want to do in this talk is that to understand contemporary as well as historical India, we have to know what is the axis of the knowledge production which informs our educational, political, journalism, in fact the wider public debate. And I have termed that as Hindu Orientalism. Okay? And Hindu Orientalism is important because if you type this word called Hindu Orientalism in Google, you will not find it. It talks about, it will give you options about Orientalist writing on Hinduism or about Hinduism. But the term Hindu Orientalism itself doesn't exist. So why do we need this new term? So I think this is Guattari, the French philosopher, who says that ideas advance through fabrication and creation of new concept. Okay? New thinking cannot be articulated by continuously relying on the old language and words that has been supplied by the system or by the establishment. New thinking requires new terminology. New thinking requires new vocabulary. And our present, because the vocabulary which is used in order to make sense of our present and ipso facto of the future, that vocabulary, whether it is from political science, history, anthropology, sociology, literature, you name it, that vocabulary is not in a position to understand what is happening now. Okay? And therefore, we have to find a new vocabulary, a new language. And that language must be sensitive to the differences, because Indian society is vast, not simply Indian society, every society is heterogeneous. So it must be sensitive to the differences and heterogeneity, but at the same time, in the name of that heterogeneity and differences, one should not lose sight of the fact that there is a grammar which defines that heterogeneity. Okay? The differences are not simply sporadic. Even there is a grammar, there is a logic behind that diversity or heterogeneity. And in order to capture that, I think Hindu Orientalism is an important concept. Now, of course, Edward Said has written about Orientalism, but his conception of Orientalism, there is a sort of whole library written in favor of Edward Said as well as against Edward Said. The latter is less. But what I find problematic, I mean, of course, it is a useful thing. By the way, Edward Said is not the first one to talk about Orientalism. It is already there. Okay? He's someone who builds on it, and his book is the most discussed. But he is not the originator of the concept. Okay? So, Edward Said does talk about Orientalism, but his conception is largely textual. As a professor of literary studies, he was more interested in novels, poetry, and so on and so forth. Right? So, Orientalism, as I see it, is not simply a textual thing. Okay? It is extra textual. It is much, much wider. Halak, who I will come to, he even talks about operation of Orientalism in the Faculty of Engineering, how technology works, how this idea of Orientalism operates in business enterprises. So it is not simply a textual, or it is not just about novels. I will show you shortly that how it also operates in international relation, how it informs what you eat, what you wear, okay, even the naming of the mohallas, okay, films. So Orientalism, unlike the Orientalism that I'm going to talk about, it is not simply a textual or bookish kind of thing. It is a much wider phenomenon which informs food as well as text, films as well as the names of the neighborhood. In fact, what you say, even the sound, okay? And this Hindu Orientalism, which I call, it is not, you should not be thinking that, okay, it is just limited to RSS or BJP. It is a language of Indian nationalism which informs, not identically, but variously different political formation, including communist parties. And I will give you one example of Irfan Habib later on, that how Marxism is also implicated in this Hindu Orientalism. So it is a supra political party template, right? Now, the way I approach this issue of Hindu Orientalism, it needs to be differentiated with certain recent writings. So, in the last 10 years or so, many people from India as well as from abroad, they have talked about decolonizing studies of India or decolonizing knowledge. But in my view, and some of these names are like Vikram Sampath. Now, when I was doing my study in JNU, such people were not even known. But he is supposed to be the popular historian of contemporary India, who writes columns or probably who appears on television and so on and so forth. Arvind Sharma, and similar calls of decolonizing India has also been issued by political parties like RSS, and even the education minister is talking about decolonizing Indian curriculum and so on. As I see it, actually these calls for decolonization are in fact attempts of recolonization or neo-colonization, because in the name of what is happening, in the name of decolonizing knowledge about India, they are in many different ways redeploying the Orientalist knowledge which has been furnished either by the British form of knowledge formation or the French or the German, but of course they are not simply using it as it was in 18th century or 19th century. It is being recast, reworked, okay? So another way of saying is that actually in the name of decolonizing, an attempt is being made to recolonize or to produce a neo-colonial form of knowledge. It is just like saying that if you look at this slogan called Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, now the whole world is like a family and you have a citizenship law, okay, so forget about the whole earth, right? Within India, you know, so one has to say that, well, what actually you mean by the whole earth is probably a very different kind of notion you may have, but also if the whole world is family, then family, as you know, family and kinship is related, like, you know, who is the member of the family. So if the assumption is that, okay, you talk about the whole world as a family, and the implicit idea is that, no, actually we mean by what we mean by it is actually a Hindu family, right? So what I'm saying is that on the face of it, the slogan looks very universal and inclusive, but the way it is used is for an ethnic exclusivist goal. So likewise, this call of decolonization can be used, and I will show you how it is being put to practice in a way that it rehashes, it redeploys older forms of colonialism to, of course, cater to the needs and demands of the present. So it is not simply like lifting things from 18th or 19th century and putting it here. There is some work being done there. Now, this Hindu Orientalism, and this is very important because, as I said, if it is a supra-political party knowledge formation, so we should not be, I think anyone who wants to save Congress, like there are demands saying that, well, the current problem that we are confronted with, it can be overcome only when Congress is re-established or it becomes a powerful opposition party, and there is a change of the government and so on and so forth. No, my point is that if there is a call or attempt to recall that, oh, in the 50s or 60s we had a great glorious past, okay, and we need to recover it, I think that exercise is an exercise in innocence. That means that we do not have sufficient critical knowledge of India. What we need is an altogether alternative vocabulary. I think the problem that we are confronted with is not a question of the party A versus party B. Okay? So in the remaining time, what I will do is, Professor Pervez has already given you some idea about Orientalism. So in 5 parts, this is a structure. I will briefly say what is Orientalism, what is Hindu Orientalism, and in particular I will show you the operation of this Hindu Orientalism in 2 cases, Islam and Muslims, but I will also show you about how it has worked in relation to Adivasis, tribal population, okay? And then I will give you certain concrete examples of operation of this Hindu Orientalism in diverse sites, and I will conclude with everyday form of Hindu Orientalism. Now, Edward Said wrote this book in 1978, and his key theoretical source was Foucault on the one hand and Gramsci on the other. So the idea of knowledge power dynamic from Foucault and the idea of hegemony from Gramsci. Okay. Now there is enough ambiguity in Edward Said himself. He will have a different rendition or definition of Orientalism on different pages of the same book. At one place he simply says that it is knowledge about the Orient. Okay. And then there is also a temporal slippage. Sometimes he takes it back as far as to Greece, sometimes from 16th century onwards. Okay. But the key point of Orientalism as a sort of theoretical idea is this, that it is based on contrast and polarity. Okay? And now this contrast and polarity works in different ways. So modern and traditional. This is one polarity which is at the heart of Orientalism. Backward versus not backward. Dynamic versus something stuck. You know, Orient has also been defined as something which is lazy. The West is mobile, you know. So the key idea of this Orientalism is the deployment of contrast and polarity. Now, so the words have changed. So we are talking about a knowledge formation at least for over 3 centuries. So at one time it was modern versus traditional, civilized versus barbarian or uncivilized. Now, close to the end of World War II, developed versus non-developed, that became more important. Okay, so these words can keep changing, but the point is the axis of that idea of polarity and binarism doesn't go away. Okay. Now in the Indian context, if you see, and I've deliberately chosen this example, many people talk about Swami Vivekananda, and then the idea is that, well, he was one of those thinkers who talked about synthesis between Hinduism and Islam. But what is missed is that, well, he talked about synthesis, but then you have to see that, so he talks about synthesis between Hinduism and Islam, but what is the manner in which he thinks about Islam and Hinduism. So in his conceptualization, Islam will provide the skeleton or body. Okay? The ruh or the spirit will be Hinduism. But as you see, this is not a symmetrical synthesis, because body is simply, because the conceptualization of Hinduism is this, that it is a spiritual force from 19th century onwards. So we are not talking about the practice, but the projection, right? So once you have inferiorized body and given importance to the spirit or to the brain, then when you talk about Islam and Hinduism as synthesis, then there is already a hierarchical operation of power here. Okay? And this alleged synthesis is already a reflection of the contrast and polarity in which Swami Vivekananda is participating. Okay? And he's not doing, by the way, as an individual, because the knowledge formation which he builds on is already, it exists independent of him, right? Now, so this is Orientalism. Now, in 2018, while Halak, he wrote this book called Restating Orientalism, and it is a critique of Edward Said. Okay, and it is a critique of Edward Said in a very interesting way, that so if you read Orientalism, Edward Said keeps talking about misrepresentation of the Orient. Okay, the Western power have misrepresented Orient. Logically, the question would be, if there is a misrepresentation and if you are a scholar, then why don't you tell us what is the correct representation? This is a logical question, right? Now, of course, the ramification of Edward Said's thesis is beyond the Middle East, but the bulk of his work or material is drawn from the Middle East, where Islam is crucial. So he keeps talking about negative depiction of the East or even Islam. He also has a book which does talk about how, Western media and power has negatively depicted Islam. But the question is, what is the correct representation? And that question he never tackles. Okay, but this is a logical question, right? Now, of course, Edward Said does critique the Western imperial power, but the solution to that, according to Edward Said, also lies in the Western knowledge formation, namely the Enlightenment and so-called secular humanism. Okay, once you have this premise, then logically speaking, the resources and vocabulary of Islam becomes out of, it is not on the table, right? Because I mean, Halak even says that Edward Said believed in the mythology of secularism, where, like, the secular humanism was the ultimate thing, and on which he could not make any compromise. But that dismisses the centuries of thought and intellectual tradition of the Islamic world, in which people have continuously thought about what is the purpose of life, what lies after death, how we should organize our society, what is the purpose of our living on this planet. So all these questions are set aside because they are not part of the so-called secular humanistic tradition which has emerged in the wake of Western Enlightenment. So this is one point. The second point is that Foucault, who talks about this knowledge power matrix, but Foucault never studied any pre-modern social formation. His entire thing is, I mean, he did go to Tunisia, he also has some writings about Iranian revolution, but these are very minor. So bulk of his scholarship or the evidence, his engagement is about the West, but not about, or at least adequately enough about, pre-modern times. Because if knowledge power configuration is central to modern society, then a logical question is, did this knowledge power nexus exist before modernity within Europe, and also did other societies, whether it is in Latin America, in the Middle East, or in Southeast Asia, did other societies also have the same kind of knowledge power nexus that Foucault talks about? And that is where Halak's intervention becomes important, because unlike Foucault, who is indebted to, so what he does, he goes into pre-modern, he goes into the history of pre-modern social formation of Islamic tradition. He studies the Ottoman Empire, he studies Indonesia, Malaysia, partly also India, but not at greater length. And there he says that in Islamic tradition, there is a different trajectory of knowledge power matrix, which is different from the way Foucault or the operation of knowledge power has been there in the Western tradition.